Welcome to the NBA Slate Breakdown. I'm Jason Gilbo. With me is Brent Hyden. Taking a look at tonight's 9-game slate. Good one here. Fair amount of high totals. A couple teams on back-to-backs. It was a Boban night last night, so it's hard to be disappointed. That GIF where the basketball player's sitting on the bench and he's shaking his head like he's mad, and then all of a sudden he starts to come to realize everything's going to be okay. That was me transferring from Jokic to Boban last night.
I think he buried the lead. It was a Felicio night last night too.
Yeah, maybe I just didn't want to give you credit for saying he was going to just torch us all.
He trolled us. He definitely trolled us. That was kind of funny. That was my enjoyment for the night, because my outside of Damian Lillard and Marvin Williams and a couple other guys, my lineups were pretty bad. So yeah. I'm just ready to move on from that.
Slate here tonight. I'll start with this Milwaukee-Detroit game. 208 total. Detroit favored by 1.5. Start with this Milwaukee side. Obviously, we saw Giannis go off last night. Huge game. We've seen Detroit of late. Pretty average in terms of defensive efficiency. I guess over the last 10 games, they ranked 25th as a whole. I don't mind going back to this Milwaukee team on a back-to-back. I don't feel like a lot of people will either.
No, I'm not. There's a couple spots that I don't necessarily mind targeting here from the Milwaukee side of this. Obviously, we don't expect Jabari Parker to play on the second night of a back-to-back, so that's going to open things up a little bit. And we're talking about Detroit, they're really, really, really bad recently. They've lost 3 straight games by an average of 19 points. They're just getting the doors blown off of them. So this could be a spot where Milwaukee does go overlooked, and there are some interesting spots to target. And that does kind of start with Giannis, who is coming off a huge game. What did he have? 23 and 13, but he had 9 combined blocks and steals. That was just insane. So if you want to roll him out, feel free. I think there's some better higher priced options to target tonight, but I think he's going to be an overlooked way to get exposure to this game. And I like to target him in games where he's facing an opponent that's not good at defending the rim. And of course, Detroit opponents are shooting 66% at the rim against them this season. So it's definitely an interesting spot for him, but tournaments, cash, if you want to roll them out, like I said, feel free. But I think there's better options to pay up for. And another guy who's a little bit cheaper across the industry that I like even more.
Then we'll jump to Bledsoe here. We talked about Bledsoe, a little bit yesterday. Didn't have that great of a game. Rebounds, assists really weren't there. Only had 2 steals. I could see this being a bounce back spot for him against Detroit, who have been god awful against point guards of late. 29th in defensive efficiency over the last 10 games, on the second most fantasy points. I don't mind Bledsoe, given the fact that his price is still relatively decent.
Yeah, he's another guy. I think if you're looking to get some exposure to the Milwaukee team and you're fading Giannis, he's definitely an interesting way to get exposure here against the Detroit team. They're 29th in defensive efficiency over the last 10 games to point guards. Just really, really bad. And the field goal attempts have been there for Bledsoe. He just the last couple games hasn't been able to connect on those. He's shooting right around 43, 44% over those games. Yeah, I think this is definitely a bounce back spot, and it's a matchup where he's been solid. 2 games against Detroit this season already, averaging 30.5 minutes and 40 fantasy points. So he's 7,400 over on DraftKings. That's a pretty fair price. He's 79 on FanDuel. That's a little too high for my taste, but definitely someone that I would consider on DraftKings.
Any interesting guys like Middleton or Henson here?
I don't necessarily mind Henson. This is a spot where some of these lengthy athletic centers have really torched the Pistons. We saw Dwayne Dedmon just destroy this team. And Henson himself has been fairly solid against this team. So he's 4,900 on DraftKings. That's a really solid price. And he's 59 on FanDuel. That's a little too high there. I'm gonna say no on FanDuel, but on DraftKings, I think he's definitely interesting as a value center option here.
Yeah, I don't mind him. I think Middleton, his price is down, he's 6,700 on DK. I still just might be looking at some other options here, I think, over Middleton tonight. He's fine. We know the minutes are going to be there. We know the production is going to be probably around 30 fantasy points. I'm just probably going to be looking other directions.
Yeah, I think he's a solid cash game option just again because of the minutes and the production should be fairly solid. I mean, he's averaging like 20.3 points over his last 6 games, and you factor in the fact that he can get some of those rebounds and assists and maybe notch a couple steals, and he does have a little bit of let's say floor. So in cash games, I think he can go there. In tournaments at his price, I think there's probably higher upside options.
And a few of these other guys are running minutes like Tony Snell. As we said yesterday, it's Tony Snell. No need to go there.
Yeah, I'm definitely not I'm not going there tonight. And like he's not even getting that many minutes. Like he had what 34 against New Orleans and 34 against Denver, but he has these other games where he's just not playing that many minutes. Like he only played 22 last night. So definitely not looking there. Like you would think he would get a few extra minutes with Parker being out, but just I'm gonna pass.
Yeah. Detroit side of things, like as you said, they've been struggling of late. And speaking of a guy who's been struggling, it's been Blake Griffin. Shot hasn't been falling. The peripheral stats have dropped quite a bit. Um, Prices come down. Like I still don't know if I'm really going back there, even with the decreased price tag.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily mind him as a cash game option, but like the production has been pretty down recently. But this is a fairly solid matchup. We know Milwaukee really gets just destroyed down low, so there is some rebounding and points potential there. But like I think it starts and ends with Andre Drummond for me. Like this is one of those spots where if you're paying up for center and you're not looking at you're not looking at like Anthony Davis or someone like that, because like Drummond is probably the better option to go with at like the higher priced price range.
Yeah, like if I've been attacking Milwaukee lately, it's still been with centers. That's kind of been about it for me. I mean, 28th in defensive efficiency over the last 10 games. They've been struggling, all season long. Fantasy points allowed, kind of middle of the road. But Drummond, like he smashed, Milwaukee three times this year. He's averaged 21 and 17 against them. And he hasn't even had the peripheral stats like the blocks and steals haven't even been there against Milwaukee. So if he puts all that together, like it could be a huge outing.
Yeah, it really could. And like his assist numbers have really dropped recently, basically since Blake Griffin has been there. But like we know he has the potential to rack up assists as well. So if like that comes back to him, like this could be just a really high upside spot for him. And we're talking about a guy. I mean, he's 15 straight double doubles. So like that's going to happen for him. And I mean, it is just a really good spot for him. So he's probably the only Pistons player that I'm really targeting here. And even though the matchup isn't great for Ish Smith, like I think he's a very solid like cash game point guard option. Like he's really cheap on DraftKings. He's only 5,900 on FanDuel. Like that's a pretty fair price for a guy who's actually been playing like really well recently, like 24, 29, 31, 44 fantasy points over his last four. Like I'll take that all day long at 5,300.
And like these other guys, like the Reggie Bullocks, Stanley Johnson, Tolvers, like it was fun when they were playing really well for that 1 week, 10 days, whatever it was. And then everyone's like, okay, this lineup's going to have to regress. And it finally has.
I mean, it was fun when you could pencil those guys in for 40 minutes for like those 1 or 2 games, but now they just have all these other guys. Like they have the Jameer Nelsons, they have the Luke Kennards, they have the James Ennis's, and you have Tolliver and all these other guys there. Now that the Pistons have a bunch of bodies, like I'm not going to target these peripheral guys that rely on heavy scoring to get their fantasy points.
Yeah. Toronto and Orlando next year, 222 over under. Toronto favored by 9.5. Some of these Toronto guys have decent price tags. Looking at Lowry, like once again, he's a guy like 7,500 on DK for Lowry against Orlando tonight. Seems really cheap. I think I'm going to start with him.
Yeah, he made it into my tournament article. Him and another guy we'll get to here in just a minute. Like I have a feeling this game could go overlooked from fantasy perspective because there's some interesting ones to target later on that we'll get to. Like I really like this spot for Kyle Lowry. Obviously, we know the Magic really struggle against point guards. They're 30th in fantasy points allowed on the season. They've been better recently, but some of that could just be because, like Russell Westbrook couldn't even hit a shot against them and some other things. But like Lowry has actually been pretty good, and people that are just like game log watching may not really notice that. Like against Detroit, he only played 25 minutes, almost 36 fantasy points. He has over 40 and in 2 of his last 4 games. Like this is an excellent spot for him, and he's a guy that I'm really focusing on, especially on DraftKings because he's 7,500. I know he's a little bit more expensive on FanDuel at 82, but that's still really cheap for a guy that has 45, 50 fantasy point upside in a matchup like this. And like the rebounding upside should be there for him because Orlando's really bad against as far as holding guards to like limiting guard rebounds. So I just think this is just a spot where Lowry is one of my core options, and I'm moving on because it's a great spot. It's a great spot for all the Raptors.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah. DeMar DeRozan, I like him. I don't mind him here tonight. A little bit expensive on FanDuel. He's 8,600 over on DraftKings. I mean, 8K. I don't mind it. Like he's a decent cash game option. I think I'm still going Lowry for cheaper though.
Yeah, I'm going the same route, and like there's so many other ways to attack this Toronto team. Like I noted in the GPP article, the average line for a game that Toronto plays in is like 213, and this is what 220, like opened at like 220. So this is projected to be like a pretty fast paced, high scoring game for the Raptors. So getting exposure there, it starts with Lowry. If you want to get DeRozan, feel free, but I think we kind of have to talk about Serge Ibaka and how freaking outstanding he has been recently, and the fact that this is a revenge game for Ibaka. Getting traded, he got traded from OKC to Orlando in the Oladipo deal, and Orlando kind of like screwed him over with the role that they gave him. But like this dude's been outstanding recently, over 30 fantasy points in 3 straight games. Like the shooting production has been there. He's been over 50% in 4 straight games. Rebounding has been really solid. There's a lot of upside for Ibaka, especially at his $5,900 price tag on FanDuel or on DraftKings, and even at 6,200 on FanDuel. Like it's a pretty solid price for him.
Yeah, I like Ibaka here. Good spots. Yeah, has been playing well. And when you look through the game logs and see like, oh, maybe there's a game where they only have 24, 25 fantasy points. It's probably because they won by 30 and they didn't need to play, 30 minutes. Like their fantasy points per minute have all been excellent. It's just they've been blowing out teams. Like Toronto's been so good of late.
Yeah, they really haven't, and that like a lot of that has to do with their bench. Like their starters have been playing really solid as well, but like their bench has just been so good this season, and I have a lot of interest in some of their bench guys as well, like Pascal Siakam, who has been ridiculously good recently. Like people are out here comparing him to Draymond Green because of how good he has been, like as far as on the defensive end, and we're talking about a guy over 25 fantasy points in 3 straight games. Excellent matchup. He's over 20 minutes in 3 straight games. He's 4K on DraftKings, and let's see, he's 4,500 on FanDuel. Like I think there's a lot of tournament appeal in him at that price tag.
Yep. Any interest in Jonas Valanciunas here?
No, and I want to have like a little bit of interest, but at 5,800, I don't know that I can go there, and I don't know. He hasn't flashed one of those upside games in a while, so it's probably going to burn me by not wanting to go there because like I feel like this could be a spot where he comes out and drops like 45 or 50. So if you want to sprinkle in some tournament exposure and a bunch of lineup, and like if you're building a bunch of lineups, then feel free. But he's like 6,400 on FanDuel. Like that's just I'm going to pass on that.
Backup guards here. You have any interest in the bench guards?
Maybe a little DeLon Wright. Like this feels like a spot where he could come out and put up a big game and rack up some blocks and steals, but they're so hard to predict at this point in time. Like one night DeLon Wright might come out and put up like 25 fantasy points in 25 minutes, or we could get the random Fred VanVleet like 40 fantasy point game. Whichever one is hot is going to be the one that usually gets the run. So I'm just going to pass there.
Yeah. Orlando side of things, we have Aaron Gordon who's listed as questionable playing tonight. It kind of downgrades some of the other guys. Like I like when he sits because there's some more usage to go around. But let's take a look at Vucevic here. Come back, 24, 29, 32 minutes, since returning from injury. He's been really solid in terms of fantasy points per minute. Like we know the usage is going to be there for him. Interesting. Like it's like I want to grab him while the price tag is down, and I kind of don't mind the matchup here.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of sneakily a solid matchup. Like Toronto, 16th in fantasy points allowed to centers on the season. They're really bad as far as giving up second chance points and points in the paint. And that's two areas. Obviously, Vucevic pretty solid as far as scoring in the paint. He's not a great offensive rebounder, but he does lead the team in second chance points. I had more interest in him if Aaron Gordon was going to be out, because then you get like Vucevic in his like 1.6 something fantasy points per minute without Aaron Gordon. But I mean, he's still, even with Aaron Gordon on the floor, it's still like 1.24, like 25% usage rate. Still pretty solid numbers, especially with no Elfrid Payton there. Like some of the offense can flow through Vucevic, and his ability to stretch the floor is kind of a nightmare for opposing defenses. So I really do like him. Like he's been able to produce in some of these tough matchups, like OKC and Philly, not easy matchups. And he's out here dropping like 37, 34 fantasy points. So in tournaments, he's definitely a solid option. I think there's better ways to go in cash. But as far as guys with like a bunch of upside, Vucevic definitely has it.
As far as the rest of the guys go, like it's hard for me to trust in terms of minutes just because we've seen some funky rotations out of the Magic lately. There's been times where they don't roll any of the point guards. Like we saw a couple of times where Augustine and Mac were both off the floor. I don't know what to do with these guys. Like, to be honest, like they're not in a great spot, so I'm not excited to use them. And I kind of feel like just on a big slate, like I don't have to.
No, I don't think you need to. I don't think you really even need to look anywhere else on this team outside of Vucevic here. Like, if you wanted to sprinkle in some Aaron Gordon or some Jonathan Simmons, you could. Like Gordon's price at 7K, that's pretty darn appealing. What is he on? What's he on FanDuel? 76. Probably going to pass on FanDuel, but on DraftKings, that price is pretty appealing. But just be aware you're dealing with a guy that is bothered. His hip is really bothering him. Like he's icing it, whenever he's not on the floor. So I would probably pass, but that is a pretty cheap price for him.
Yeah. Indiana and Atlanta next game here, 214 total. Indiana by 5. We've seen Oladipo, come off a little bit of a down game against Dallas, but we've seen some high ceiling games out of him. It's just his price is really high. 9K, like on DraftKings, like there's some other options, like Curry's only 500 more. You have some other guys cheaper. FanDuel, he's 10K. This game's weird. Like I want to have a lot of interest in it on the Indiana side, but I don't know how much I'm going to actually get.
No, it's kind of tough because most of these Indiana players are kind of overpriced. Like I don't necessarily mind Oladipo like in cash games. I think as far as, especially on like FanDuel at 10K, like that's a hard pass. But on like DraftKings at 9K, like I don't necessarily mind it in cash games, but I don't believe that this game stays close. Like that 5-point spread, I think that's fake. Like I think Indiana comes out and just destroys Atlanta. Like Atlanta's bad. Like Atlanta is really, really, really bad right now. So like that's going to limit his Oladipo's upside if he's only going to be able to play like 28, 29 minutes. But a guy, he could get you 40, 45 fantasy points, which you'll take that at 9K in cash. So that's where I would go. Like I do have more interest in maybe Corey Joseph, who's pretty cheap. He's 5,200 over on DraftKings, 51 on FanDuel. Like obviously we know this is an excellent matchup for point guards. So he would be the cheap exposure that I get here. And the rest of the guys like the Thad Youngs and the Miles Turners, like, if you want to sprinkle some in tournaments, feel free, but like they're pretty pricey, even though this is a solid matchup.
Yeah, it's a good matchup, and it's a matchup that I've tried to get right with Turner before, and he just hasn't done. He hasn't shot particularly well against Atlanta this year, especially coming off a big game. Like you think he'd be able to follow it up here. Like I'd rather take a shot on Turner if he was like 6,300 instead of 7,300.
Yeah, like I will say, like the rebounding upside, I think in this matchup is pretty solid. Like we've seen him actually be better on the board, so that does actually help him. But it's interesting, like the Pacers, who have notoriously been a bad rebounding team, have like pulled down at least 50 rebounds in their last 5 games. They've actually out rebounded their opponents in their last 5 games. So with Turner and Thad, being better on the glass, like that does help their floors a little bit, but. Again, we're talking, these guys are just too expensive, I think.
Any interest in small forwards? I know Lance Stevenson on the road, Bogdanovich, although Stevenson's played really well against Atlanta in the two matchups.
He really has. Like, I think you can sprinkle in some exposure there, but again, like at 5K, there's going to be other guys that I like a little bit more on the slate. So I will probably look other places.
Yeah, like he's 4,700 on FanDuel. I think he's probably a little bit more viable there.
Yeah, I would definitely say he's more viable over on FanDuel.
Atlanta side of things, I don't like a lot of these options here. John Collins is priced up a little bit, and I just don't think he's worth the price tag as much as I like John Collins. I just actually don't think I'm going to be looking to get any Atlanta exposure.
I'm not really either. Like, I think Torian Prince is I know I've been saying this a little bit too much probably already this podcast. Like, he's interesting in tournaments, just because he's one of the guys that you feel pretty comfortable is going to get, right around the 29, 30, 31 minutes mark, even though it's not like the greatest of matchups here. I think he's usable. And then like the rest of these guys, like they're starting to get healthy. I think Bembry is the only one that's like actually out. Like Delaney's possibly going to be back. They have all these bodies here. They're tanking. They're letting these young kids play even more. So I'm not terribly interested in anyone else. If you wanted to get maybe some cheap exposure to like Mike Muscala, who's been playing decent minutes recently, you can, but not really that great of a matchup. As I mentioned, Indiana's been really, really solid on the glass recently, so that does hurt the upside of some of these other guys.
Yeah, and one thing to note about Prince, I mean, last four games, huge usage rates, 27% against the Lakers, 31% against Indiana, 28% against Detroit, 23% against Milwaukee. Minutes have kind of been, upper 20s, lower 30s, but a ton of shots here, and he's always got that steal upside too.
Yeah, like I said, that's the only reason why I'm even a little bit interested in him is just because like the usage and the production has been solid for him, and he's one of the guys that like you expect to get a solid amount of minutes because he is one of the young guys that is kind of the future of this team.
Yeah. Moving on here, Charlotte and Boston. Charlotte on a back-to-back. We saw Dwight Howard, last night missed most of the first half. He did come back out in the second, absolutely dominated. List is probable for tonight. Still a little hesitation though here.
Yeah, like I do have some concern about Dwight. Like I saw a tweet late last night and I didn't get a chance to retweet it, but like apparently he told one of the beat reporters that like he popped a rib out of place. Like that sounds painful as hell. Like to pop a rib out of place. Like I don't know how you even do that, and I definitely don't know how you go back out and you put up freaking 24 points on 5 blocks after popping a rib out of place. But that is a little concerning. I know he's listed as probable, but I would definitely keep an eye on that. And then we still have to keep an eye on the status of MKG and Tyler Zeller or whatever Zeller it is with
Cody.
There's too many Zellers in the NBA. Too many Zellers, too many Plumlees, and too many Hernan Gomez's and all these other dudes. Like we do kind of have to keep an eye on the status of the rest of the Charlotte team because they could end up being really shorthanded, and without some of these big men, like if Dwight sat and Cody Zeller sat, like we might get some Hernan Gomez or something.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting to see what value can shake up here. Like, I don't mind targeting some bigs against Boston. I think when looking at some other guys here, like I think I'm going to go other directions than Kemba tonight. Obviously had a solid night against Chicago last night. It's been okay against Boston this year. The fact that Marcus Smart is back does worry me a little bit more about taking point guards against Boston. So I don't love Charlotte tonight. I don't really love this game. I'm kind of looking elsewhere.
I think the only person that I'm really interested in from the Charlotte side of this game, and that's assuming Michael Kidd-Gilchrist is out, is going to be Jeremy Lamb, just because he's really cheap, and it's going to be one of those games where he comes in like if MKG is out, like we're going to get mega chalk Jeremy Lamb, and like it's really scary to fade Jeremy Lamb when he's chalked because he could come out and just completely bust, or he could come out and put up like a massive like 34 fantasy point game or something like that. And he hasn't been terrible against Boston in 2 games this season, 26 minutes, 20 fantasy points. Like he's 4,500 on DraftKings and 4,400 on FanDuel. Like even if we don't get the MKG news prior to lock, like I think he's someone that you can roll out and he's still going to get a decent amount of minutes, and like 20, 21 fantasy points at his current price isn't going to kill you. And then, you do, get the added benefit of MKG possibly sitting. So that's probably where I'm going to go. And then the rest of Boston, like I said, you're just going to have to wait and see who's in and who's out. And like it could open up some Frank Kaminsky, even though he's not someone that I really want to target. You could open up, like I said, some Hernan Gomez or something like that. So I think we just kind of have to wait on the news.
Yep. As far as the Boston side of things go, I don't mind using Kyrie here. Like Kyrie's been pretty solid of late. Decent cash game guy. I think there is a reasonably high ceiling. This game can stay close, which it probably should. We've seen Charlotte, I mean, been pretty pedestrian on defense of late. I mean, 21st in defensive efficiency as a team. They've been a little bit better against point guards. But I think Kyrie's price is pretty interesting here.
Yeah, it really is. And he's a guy like on Boston's current winning streak, he's averaging like 20, almost 25 points, almost 7 rebounds, and a little over six assists. Like I have a lot of interest in him. Like if I'm getting a point guard from this game, it's going to be Irving. He's a couple hundred more than Kemba over on DraftKings, and he's 400 more than Kemba on FanDuel. Like I think he's the guy that I'm going with. And I'm hoping people are scared off of the 16 minutes and 18 fantasy points he's averaged against Charlotte in 2 games this season. Like I think that could scare some people off. So he's a guy I think has tournament upside and is definitely a solid cash game option. So he's where my interest starts. And then it probably ends with like Jason Tatum and Al Horford. Like I think this is an excellent spot for Al Horford. He's 6,300 on DraftKings.
Yeah, 65 on FanDuel, so he's really down across the industry.
Yeah, this is a really, really like sneaky good spot for Al Horford. Charlotte 23rd against centers over the last 10 games. I know obviously Horford doesn't play center all the time, but like this is a really, really good Al Horford spot. And like he's going to be a guy. I wish I would have like paid closer attention to his price tag because he would have made it into the GPP article over maybe someone like Vucevic. I don't think people are going to go with Horford tonight, and I think that might be a mistake.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are just going to overlook this game. You mentioned Tatum. His price is down, like he's only 4,900 on FanDuel, but I'm kind of looking at Marcus Morris here, 4,600 on FanDuel. I know he's what 5K on DraftKings. Been pretty solid here of late. Like, the mints are going to be there. Like, that's kind of a nice price if you're kind of going stars and scrubs, like to get some exposure.
Yeah, I think both guys are options that you can target here. Obviously, we know Charlotte weak against, the small forward / power forward position this season. So both guys are players that you can consider here. I mean, I can't necessarily make a big case against one over the other. I will say, Charlotte does really struggle in transition, which happens to be somewhere where Tatum is actually really, really good. They also really struggle in spot up shooters, which Tatum has the edge over Morris there. So both options are guys that you can look at. If you're looking probably cash games, Morris seems like he might be the safer option. Tatum probably the better tournament play.
Any interest in the other guards there?
Smart's cheap. That's about it. That's about all I got there. Like, I mean, he's cheap enough to at least consider. I mean, 4,800 for a guy with the steals upside and like the defensive statistics that he can rack up in a game does make him pretty interesting as well for cash and tournaments.
Yeah, I mean, he's been over 20 fantasy points since returning from injury. I don't hate it in this spot.
Yeah, no, I really don't. Like, I think this is a solid spot for him. And it's more just like, I don't think he's like that great of a play tonight, but the price makes him someone that you have to at least look at.
Finally, we get to an exciting game. This has been such a downer pod throughout the first 4 games, but Warriors and Wizards here, 226 total. Golden State favored by 8.5. We get the Durant coming home narrative, and he's under 10K on both sides.
Yeah, that was like the first thing that stood out to me when I was doing my research for the slate. I saw Durant like 9,800. And I was like, yeah, he's going. That was like he's like the first guy on my GPP article. I'm like, that is just ridiculously cheap for Durant in a great matchup. I will say we do need to keep an eye on the news. There has not been any word out of Washington like late last night or this morning about it, but if anyone watched that game, towards the end of the game, like Otto Porter went up for like a dunk or a layup and got blocked by Giannis, and he hit the floor like a ton of bricks. Like it was loud. Like you could hear the thump over the crowd, like on the TV. And he was favoring his arm for the rest of the game. It was like the last maybe like 5 minutes or 6 minutes. I would be definitely concerned that he may end up missing this game. It is a back-to-back, but we should get news ahead of time. So that is something to keep an eye on. But back to Durant. I could go on about like why he's a good play. Like this is a dude, he's been over like 40 fantasy points in like 7 of his last 10 games. It's been like a model of consistency. Excellent matchup. Like he's torched the Wizards last time they faced where he put up like 60 fantasy points. Hometown narrative. Just played Kevin Durant tonight.
Yeah, like he's the guy that I think I'm building around as far as superstars go. I know there's a couple other high price options that we'll get to in a little bit, but it's like I'm going to look at Durant here, just the perfect player to go and attack Washington. Like we like attacking these guys, like we saw what Giannis did. Not that I'm expecting a Giannis type game, but these athletic wings that can score, like we know they torch Washington, and Durant fits that mold.
Yeah, and like Giannis racked up six blocks and 3 steals or something like that. Kevin Durant is a very, very skilled defensive wing player that can rack up blocks and steals as well. Like you mentioned, probably it's really tough to say like he's going to come out and do what Giannis did, but he definitely could. And at 9,800 for a guy, if he comes out and puts up like 60 something fantasy points, you're going to be really, really happy.
Yeah. As far as other options go, like I don't mind getting the rest of exposure to like guys like Curry and Green. I don't think they're core options for me. I think obviously Durant, if I'm taking this, he's the core option, but I think Curry's intriguing here, given that his price is down as well. Like we're seeing all these guys down in price because they just don't have to go out and put up 50 fantasy point games, and it's decreasing their price tags.
No, they don't have to, but they obviously can if games stay close, and like we've seen it. I mean, their prices are depressed across the industry because they're coming off games where they both played like 30 something minutes because they just like blew the freaking Thunder and the Knicks out, and they've been the last couple games they've just been destroying opponents. But like we know they have upside. Like we saw the Clippers and the Portland or the Clippers game for Curry with his 70 something points, and the Denver or Portland game for Durant with the 70 something points. These guys have tons of upside at their prices. So like I really like Curry. Durant's obviously my favorite option, but like I think Curry's number 2, and then Draymond comes in at number 3. Like Draymond's pretty darn cheap as well, and this is not a terrible matchup for him either.
No, Draymond at 7,600 on FanDuel, like where he can rack up some blocks and steals, like sign me up at that price.
Yeah, and I mean even 7,200, like if he gets the double double, which he obviously has that potential, even has the triple double potential in this spot. So like at 7,200 on DraftKings, that's a tough fade at that price.
Interesting Klay Thompson here.
Maybe some GPP interest, but like I have more interest in Durant and Curry and Draymond, like there's just probably not going to be room for Klay in my lineups.
Yeah, I know he had a solid game against the Knicks. Like he's had solid shooting games. Just the peripheral stats have been so lacking for Klay, really over this month in general.
Yeah. So it's probably going to be a pass for me.
Washington side, obviously, the Porter news is something to keep an eye on. That likely would slide Oubre into the starting lineup. Looking at Washington here, like I like getting some Beal exposure, even though it's a kind of a tough matchup. But like I want obviously the correlation in this game, and I think it's going to start with Beal.
Yeah, I mean it kind of has to, like just with the usage and everything else coming with Beal, like he probably doesn't have like a bunch of as far as like tournament winning upside at that price. What is he, 8,800 on DraftKings and 85 on FanDuel? Wow, he's cheaper on FanDuel. Good job. Probably doesn't have like a bunch of tournament upside in the spot, but like I mean if he comes out and gets you like 45 46 fantasy points and he's part of your Golden State Washington like game stack, like you'll take that all day long. So it starts with him. And same thing as yesterday, like I don't hate Tomas Satoransky, even though he didn't get 30 fantasy points. Like I said, he was basically a lock for. Like he could definitely come out and do that tonight in a matchup. It's not great, but it's also not bad. Like Emmanuel Mudiay and Trey Burke were able to put up good games against the Warriors. So like Yeah. So
Yeah,
Satoransky could easily put up a solid outing here. So he's another guy. His price is starting to climb. Like he's 5,900 on DraftKings.
still 69.
Nice.
Except it's not nice.
No, I'm not going there on FanDuel, but DraftKings he's definitely in play. That's where I would start, and then obviously the Porter news is going to be very important because both Porter and Oubre guys that I have a lot of interest in. Like Porter didn't make it in my tournament article, but given the way he's been shooting the ball recently, like I know he didn't shoot very well last night, but like given the way he's been shooting the ball recently and like the upside and the role he has in this on this team, like he could come out and put up a huge game here against the Warriors. Like he already did it once. It was 53.5 fantasy points. Like he has that kind of potential tonight.
Yeah, and you mentioned he didn't shoot last night, still put up, right around 40 fantasy points. Like the rebounding has been there, the steals have been there. Like Porter's been an excellent mid-range play, since Wall's gone down. If he suits up, like he'll be definitely a guy that I'll look to get some exposure to.
Yeah, and I think Oubre is obviously a very solid value option from this game. I mean, 4,900 on DraftKings and 5K on FanDuel. Like the minutes again, they weren't that high last night at 23 minutes, but like 23 fantasy points. He's just been really active for this team. So like I have a lot of interest in him, and even Markieff Morris is someone that you can target. Like his price still will not come up, even though he's putting up solid games, like 29 fantasy points last night, 4,900 on DraftKings, and 55. Like even at 55 on FanDuel, that's still an excellent price, and the matchup isn't terrible for him tonight.
Are you interested in Gortat? Had a decent outing the first time these two met. Wasn't bad last night, but I think you were probably expecting maybe a little bit more.
It was kind of bad last night. He was like, I mean,
I'm
21
trying to give
fantasy
I'm trying to
points.
give Gortat the benefit of the doubt because it's been a pretty negative Gortat feeling this year, and I just want to give him a little bit of love.
Well, like I drowned on my way back from Gortat Island last night. Like my dinghy like sprung a leak and sank, and like I just drowned in the waters. It was cold and I was lonely. I'm not
So,
going back to Gortat Island tonight.
yeah, so I assume you're staying dry.
Yeah. And one quick news: Daniel Tice is out for tonight. So I don't
That's
know
actually
that.
some minutes that would. I mean, he's been getting around 20 minutes here.
Yeah, so that changes things a little bit for Boston. Those minutes could end up going to Greg Monroe or something like that.
Yeah. Is that it from Washington here?
Yeah, I think so.
Phoenix and Memphis next, 216 over under. Just saw Tyson Chandler ruled out. That's not noteworthy news. We've been dealing that with for a while. Devin Booker obviously coming off a monster game. He's really back-to-back monster games. The minutes, usage rate, same stuff here. Look at this Memphis backcourt defense. That's really been bad lately. I don't mind using some Booker. I don't mind using some Peyton here. This game should stay close. Like I've been worrying that with other Memphis games, but I think there's a decent ceiling for both Peyton and Booker.
Yeah, I think obviously you're gonna probably lean Booker here as far as like the better option of the two. The minutes are gonna be there for him. The field goal attempts and the production's gonna be there for him. Like, I mean, the dude almost put up a triple double against New Orleans last game. The one game he played against Memphis, he was 48 fantasy points. Tons of upside here for Devin Booker, who's been playing out of his mind recently. I think obviously the matchup doesn't scare you that much. Like Memphis 10th in defensive efficiency against shooting guards over the last 10 games, but on the season they're 20th in fantasy points allowed. They are playing a little bit faster. Obviously, with Marc Gasol in there, that does slow things down just a little bit, but their defense has just been really bad recently. So Booker, obviously, top tier play here, a guy that I'm going to be trying to force into most of my lineups. Alfred, I don't necessarily mind, like 7,100. That's a really solid price for him over on DraftKings. Let's see, what is he on FanDuel? 73. That's a pretty solid price for him there, too. I think I'm going to have more interest in a point guard on the other side of this game, but definitely don't mind the Booker play here.
Yeah. As far as the front court goes, or even some of the wings, TJ Warren was priced down a little bit. Like he was in the 6K range. Now he's starting to come up with a couple of strong games. You looking for that to continue here tonight?
I think he's a fine cash option. Again, he's not a guy that I'm going to really look at in tournaments. It's not really that great of a spot for him. I think I'm going to be mean, was he 6,500 on DraftKings? He is 71 on FanDuel. Like, I'm going to be looking other places in that price range tonight. But as far as at least tournaments goes, but cash games, yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily think he's a terrible option.
Yep. With Chandler out, obviously we've seen some Len play some solid minutes. This isn't a matchup that I'm really looking to get exposure here too.
No, I'm not. There's just so many other better center options on this play. Like, I'm not going to go with the Lynn. Like, we saw the floor with Alex Lynn, and obviously matchup against Anthony Davis, you do expect that to happen. Like, you expect the Lynn foul trouble game to kind of happen. But I mean, he hasn't been terrible in this matchup. 3 games, 25 minutes, 23 fantasy points is what he's basically averaging. I'm still not going to go there, though. Like I said, there's better center options tonight. Like 5,700 on DraftKings. Like, I would rather John Henson for cheaper. Like Serge Ibaka's right around the same price. Like some other guys that we're going to get to are similarly priced. Like, give me Al Horford at 63 over Alex Lynn at 57.
Yeah, I agree with it there. Memphis side of things, you mentioned you have interest in the point guard, and I'm assuming it's not Mario Chalmers. It's Andrew Harrison.
Yeah, no, definitely not Mario Chalmers. That would be way off the reservation there. But Andrew Harrison made it in my tournament article. Like, I don't care about his ownership. Just, we know the matchup is outstanding against the Phoenix team that's really bad against point guards this season. Production has been really solid for Harrison. He's been over 30 fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games. Field goal attempts have been solid for him. Usage without Tyreek Evans on the floor, 28, 29%, almost a fantasy point per minute. You're giving me that in a matchup like this, yeah, I'm going to take that all day long. Like 5,700 on DraftKings, 6K on FanDuel. That's a really solid price for him.
I will say Marc Gasol on FanDuel is really cheap at 7,200 for this matchup. The DK matchup, like it's priced up. He's 8,400. He's the 3rd most expensive center. But FanDuel, like he's going to be a guy that I'm looking to get plenty of exposure to. I know we've seen some kind of non-high ceiling games. He had a decent game against Boston, kind of some pedestrian numbers in between that. But look at Phoenix. I mean, 29th in defensive efficiency against theirs over the last 10 games. 2nd most fantasy points allowed. 7,200, like that's just way too cheap for Gasol.
Yeah, it really is. And like he has a bunch of upside at that price on FanDuel. And like even on DraftKings, like I think he is cash. He's definitely cash viable. I don't think he has a bunch of upside given the price on DraftKings, but you could definitely go there. And FanDuel, like he is a very, very solid like upper mid-range option here tonight.
You're looking at the power forwards here. Michael Green, like solid price across the industry.
Yeah, he's still pretty cheap across the industry. Excellent matchup. Production has been really good for him. And without Deonta Davis in the lineup, he could, maybe even sprinkle in a couple extra minutes. I mean, he's been 35, 34 over the last 2 games. But yeah, he's a guy definitely interesting given his current price tag.
Is that kind of it from Memphis?
Yeah.
OKC and Dallas. This isn't really a thrilling game for me. I'm actually probably a little ticked off against OKC, I think, over the prior few games. More so the Orlando game, I think, because they just haven't been able to buy shots of late. And you're probably even more frustrated than me being an OKC fan.
Well, we're going to sign Corey Brewer, so that solves that problem.
Oh, yeah. Oh, man. We made it 7 games in before we get the Brewer tilled.
Brewer and his whole 28% field or 28% percentages from freaking 3 points going to solve our shooting problems.
Let's keep it positive. We had a good stretch here of some games. OKC here tonight. Like we look at this Dallas defense, I don't mind targeting. I'm probably going to be looking at maybe some cheaper guys. Like I don't know how much I'll be getting exposure to Westbrook. Pretty pedestrian numbers of late. Same with like Paul George. Steven Adams has actually been the one that's been crushing lately.
Yeah, he really has, but for some reason he just hasn't been able to do it in this matchup. Like Dallas has been a team that you've wanted to attack with centers all season long. They have been a little bit better of late, even though Miles Turner just like destroyed them. But for some reason, Adams in this matchup has just been absolutely atrocious. Like he's averaging 15 fantasy points in 30 minutes in 2 games against Dallas this season. It's a little concerning. Obviously, you're not looking at him in cash games, but if you want to get a tournament sprinkle, feel free. If you want to roll Russ, go for it. Like Dallas really bad against point guard for the majority of the season. I don't really have that much interest in OKC side, except for like I said, maybe some Adams in tournaments. Russ, if you want to use him, but there's better pay up options tonight. And Paul George is a little bit interesting just because the peripheral stats are going to be there for him, but maybe cash games for George, but not someone I'm looking at in tournaments.
I think if Durant was priced like a little bit higher, I'd have a little bit more George interest. But I think because like I'll find the 1,200 to go up from George to Durant, I think tonight.
Yeah, like just where these guys are priced, especially from the OKC side, like there's just better ways to spend your salary, I think.
Yeah, Melo's cheap, but there's been a reason why he's cheap. Like he hasn't top 30 fantasy points since the Cleveland game, and he's been in some good spots, and he just hasn't been able to do it.
Yeah, I mean, he just like there's a little bit of rebounding upside for him, and Dallas does kind of struggle to defend the 3-point line, so there is a little bit of interest there for a guy that basically doesn't do anything but spot up at this point in the season. But again, 5,900, like give me some Washington exposure in the same price range. Give me some of these other guys tonight.
Yeah. No issue with the bench here. Like we're not talking anyone, at least until Corey Brewer comes into play. Then we can start talking about the bench.
Yeah, once we get Corey Brewer, then he's gonna be like a lock and load every night. 3-pointers, Kobe.
Dallas. I do have some interest in a couple guys here. Weirdly, it starts with JJ Barea. I think he's the only guy that I really have interest in on this side. Because everyone else I don't really like here, like Harrison Barnes in a tough matchup. I know his price is down. We've seen Wesley Matthews, like his minutes have trended down. He's only averaging 29 over the last 5 games. His production's dropped quite a bit. I don't know. I don't want to play the guessing game as far as like bigs here either.
I actually do have interest in Wesley Matthews. He's 4,600 over on DraftKings. What is he on FanDuel?
He's 47.
Like he's 32 minutes last 2 games. Like the other games, like I mean, outside of like Sacramento, like the Lakers game, they got blown out. Like the field goal attempts have still been there. He's got 12 in 3 of his last 4 games. And this is an Oklahoma City team 23rd in defensive efficiency over the last 10 games against shooting guards. They've also been 27th against small forwards over the last 10 games. Like it kind of depends on the starting lineup. Like if they shift him down to the small forward position and they start Barea, like I do have less interest in Matthews, but if they start Smith at the 1 and start Matthews at the 2, like I think he's definitely someone that I will have a little bit of exposure to. Unfortunately, we may not get that news in time, but like I think he has plenty of upside given his price, and he can be used in cash games, I think. But Barea, you mentioned, he's a guy, like I think this is obviously a decent matchup for him. It's a spot where he's been able to produce in limited minutes. He's averaging like over a fantasy point per minute against this team. He's been playing even more minutes recently. The field goal attempts have been solid for him. Production's been outstanding. I think you can get away with using like Barea in the spot in cash games and tournaments.
Yeah, and Dennis Smith going through a little bit of a shooting slump here. Hasn't been great. Like I think there's other guys in the price. I'd rather just go Barea over Smith.
Yeah, I think Carlisle broke Dennis Smith by sliding him over to the 2. That really kind of hurt him, I think, a little bit, like just as far as confidence and his ability to shoot. Like it's kind of weird, like how that would affect a player. Like you wouldn't think it would be like, oh, you're just sliding a position over. Like you're just not going to have the ball in your hand as much. Like it shouldn't matter that much, but it really does. And I think right now I'm going to take a wait and see approach with Smith.
Yeah. Any interest in any of the bigs here? Dwight Powell, Dirk Nowitzki. I know Nerlens Noel's due back. I don't know what his role is going to be moving forward because hasn't had a role to predict really his entire career.
Yeah, I'm not going. Definitely not going there with Noel. Like, if you want to sprinkle in some Dirk, feel free. Like, this is a spot. Like, it hasn't happened this season, but historically, he's been like really, really freaking good against OKC in the past. So, if you want to sprinkle some in tournaments, go for it. But it's basically Barea and maybe some Wes Matthews, and then that's it from this game.
Yep. New Orleans and San Antonio here, 218 total. I like this game here quite a bit. We'll start with this New Orleans side. Obviously, Anthony Davis has been tremendous. Price tag up, obviously, as expected. 12.5. He's 11.7 on DraftKings. I'm willing to get some exposure here. I don't think we see the 90 burger that we did last time out, though.
No, I think cash games. Obviously, you're crazy if you fade Anthony Davis, even though it's a really like not that great of a matchup. That being said, like I wouldn't say to fade him in tournaments, but there are merits to actually fading him in tournaments. Like if he's going to be really popular and he comes out and he puts up like a pedestrian like 50, 52 fantasy points, which we know he could do. Like he did it last time these teams played. He did it against Milwaukee 2 games ago. Like this could be a spot where if you do fade him in tournaments, it could really pay off for you. But in cash games, like you just eat the chalk, roll the unibrow, and hope he doesn't go to the locker room and after the first quarter.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's that bad of a spot. Like we've seen San Antonio struggle a little bit against opposing bigs of late, and Davis has had some reasonable success against the Spurs.
Yeah, he has. Like, I mean, it's still the Spurs, and so like I'm just gonna say like it's not like a great spot because it is the Spurs, and we know like they have the ability to clamp down on defense. But obviously, without Kawhi in there, and maybe without Pau Gasol, like their defense is gonna be better. Who knows?
Yeah. I don't have a ton of interest in like the other guys from this New Orleans side here. I know Drew Holiday's been really good. He probably the only other guy that I get some exposure to, but like Mirotic, I don't really have a lot of exposure to. Like his shot's been really horrible. Like he's got to rely on some of the rebounding and some of the peripheral stats, and I don't see him getting as much as what he did against maybe like Milwaukee or as much as against Phoenix to kind of make up for it.
Yeah, you mean you don't have? What about Emeka Okafor? You don't have interest in him?
He, I'm not. No, I'm not gonna. I'm not giving you a reaction.
No, like it's mostly just Anthony Davis in the spot for me. Like I don't like I'm not. Holiday has been really good recently outside of the Phoenix game. Just been scoring ridiculously. Like his shooting has been really good. Like it's really tough to argue against him. Obviously, again, matchup not that great up against a Spurs team. Like I think there's better places to go in that spot. Like Devin Booker's 800 more on DraftKings and he's 700 more on FanDuel. Like I'll find the extra salary to go there tonight. And if you want to sprinkle in some Rondo, go for it. Like I'm done trying to predict the Rondo games. Like it's just random at this point. I'm not gonna try to figure out when Rondo is gonna put up a big game.
Yeah, if this game was on televised, I'd be okay with Rondo, but it's not. So
there you go.
Yeah. As far as the Spurs side here, obviously you mentioned Pau Gasol out tonight. Start with LaMarcus Aldridge here. Had the big game against Denver, decent game against Cleveland. Like expect a usage rate probably right around 30% tonight against the Pelicans defense. Sign me up for some Aldridge.
Yeah, he made in my tournament article. I don't know how popular he's going to be. I don't really care. Like this is a matchup I've gone on like pretty much every slate since Boogie went down. Like the Pelicans are really bad defensively, like on the interior without Cousins in there. Like they're giving up like the second or like the most points in the paint per game. They're giving up the most rebounds per game. They're giving up a bunch of second chance points. They're terrible on post ups. Like these are all areas where Aldridge is really good. He's a flat out lock for me here. Like 8,100 on DraftKings. He's 9K on or 8,700 on FanDuel. Like those prices not too high for a guy who's averaging like over 31% usage rate without Powell and without Kawhi on the floor, 1.25 fantasy points per minute. Like I'm just locking that in and moving on.
Yeah, I'm with you. Dejounte Murray is someone I have a fair amount of interest in. 6,800 on FanDuel is a little expensive. I think the Cleveland game is something that kind of got a little bit overhyped, but 6K on DraftKings, I don't mind. Against a New Orleans defense that is allowing the third most rebounds to opposing point guards over the last 10 games. Assists, steals, like they're all going to be there. And this is a guy who's just producing across the board. And I know he played 34 minutes. I guess my only gripe is I would like to continually see him into like the lower and mid 30s in terms of minutes because there are times where we do see him play like mid to high 20s.
Yeah, but at least he's producing whenever he's still doing that. So like you're pretty comfortable using him in cash because like he can obviously crash the boards and get you that upside because he does have double digit rebounding potential and especially in this matchup. Yeah, like he's great in all formats. Like I think he's definitely a guy that you can use as a core option here against the Pelicans team that you mentioned. Terrible as far as limiting rebounds to guards. They're terrible against point guards just in general. So I do like Dejounte Murray a lot here. So it's going to be LaMarcus Aldridge and Murray are going to be the guys that I'm building around from the Spurs side.
Yep. I think with like Rudy Gay back, like it kind of hurts like both him and Kyle Anderson just kind of splitting time.
I think tonight, without Pau Gasol being in there, it might actually help a little bit because you're going to see LaMarcus Aldridge probably move down to the 5. That being said, obviously they could start Davis Bertans, who has usually been pretty good whenever one of the big men is out. So Rudy Gay is really cheap. Kyle Anderson still pretty cheap. I don't necessarily mind going with either of those 3 guys, the Andersons, the Gays, the Bertans, if you want to get more exposure. Like it's not a bad matchup for either guy. I'm just not going to probably have any of them in my lineups.
No, I don't think so. And you mentioned Bertans, like he's been a guy that we've used, but I think with a couple of healthier bodies, it wouldn't be surprised if like he doesn't get the minutes that he usually does.
Exactly. That's why it's kind of one of those situations where I'm probably off of him here.
Houston and LA, last game of the night. I'm excited for this one.
Yeah, I am too. I'm wondering if there's going to be a fight. Someone was knocking on my door earlier. Like I think they snuck in through the secret passageway and was knocking on my door. I didn't answer. But this is this is a good game. Like I'm pretty excited for this game.
Yeah, I am too. Let's start with this Houston side. Chris Paul's price tag 8,300 on DraftKings, 8,400 on FanDuel. Like, I think he might be the guy that I get the most exposure to tonight of any one player.
Yeah, it's going to be really tough to get for me to build my lineups with like Aldridge and Horford and Lowry and Booker and Chris Paul. But that price on Chris Paul is just ridiculous. It's just too cheap. It's this matchup. Yeah, it's just too cheap.
Yeah, it is. I mean, put up 40 fantasy points last time out. I expect a little bit more peripheral numbers to follow. I know he's been pretty kind of pedestrian, right in that 35 to 40 fantasy point range of late. But that's just been Houston. Like, it's kind of similar to the Warriors of late. Like, Paul doesn't need to have the big 50 fantasy point games, but I think there could be a little bit extra here tonight.
Yeah, I definitely think there could be a little bit of extra motivation for Chris Paul. Obviously, this is the second game he'll play back at the Staples Center, but you have the little extra motivation because this Austin Rivers is on the floor this time. So, and he's not going to be, sneaking onto the floor from the sideline talking smack. I think there's going to be a little extra motivation in the tank for Chris Paul tonight. And this is one revenge play that I will not be fading here.
No. And then obviously James Harden, put up a huge game last time these two played. Well, do we need to say much about James Harden?
No, we don't. These teams have met actually twice now. Chris Paul didn't play, or Harden didn't play in one of them. Chris Paul didn't play in one of them. Whenever Chris Paul was out, Harden put up a big game. When Harden was out, Chris Paul put up the 40 fantasy points. But if you want to play Harden, play Harden. Like it's just comes down to it's the same thing with Westbrook and Giannis and LeBron. Like if you want to play these guys, just freaking play them. Like you don't need us to tell you that they're good players.
Yeah, and outside of those guys, like we haven't seen a lot of production out of kind of some of the secondary players. Like obviously Ariza's still working his way back from injury. Eric Gordon's been dealing with illnesses and he's been banged up as usual. Clint Capella is also questionable for tonight's game. Like, I think it's going to be kind of Paul and Harden. I don't know how much interest Ryan Anderson's out tonight. Like, I don't know. Maybe you can take a flyer on PJ Tucker, but I'm not terribly intrigued with PJ Tucker.
Is anybody ever terribly intrigued by PJ? Exactly. I think Ariza's a fine option just because he's cheap and he's going to play a bunch of minutes and the matchup isn't terrible. And obviously we do have that added motivation here. He's a guy that you could sprinkle in, especially with no Ryan Anderson. There's going to be a couple extra shots to go around. If Clint Capella sits, You're probably going to see like Tarek Black and Nene, split the minutes. I think Nene probably plays a few extra because he's going to have to match up against DeAndre Jordan. Nene is a guy that I would have a little bit of interest in as a value option, but it's Harden or it's Chris Paul. It starts with Chris Paul, pretty much ends with Chris Paul, and then sprinkle in Harden and Ariza if you really want to.
Yep. Clipper side of things, obviously they're on the back-to-back. Is Gallinari ruled out tonight?
Not yet. No, I'm monitoring his Facebook page to keep an eye on it, though.
Yeah, because that's where obviously if Gallinari's out, like Tyrone Wallace is still cheap. Played another 31 minutes last night, put up 28, 29 fantasy points. I don't mind going back to the well there with Wallace given his price tag, and if Gallinari's out, like he's going to be a popular value.
Yeah. If Gallinari sits, we obviously already know Avery Bradley is out, so you're going to get a bunch of Tyrone Wallace minutes, and you just plug him in and move on as one of your value options. And then Lou Williams revenge game.
Sign me up. 7,700 on FanDuel. Like the price isn't moving over there.
Price is moving on DraftKings. He's up to almost 8K, but like still, he's averaging like 53 fantasy points in 2 games against his team this season. So. Yeah.
Tobias Harris let me down last night. I don't mind going back there. I know Houston's been decent against power forwards lately, especially if Gallinari sits. Like I think Harris will find himself. A lot of that game was just kind of weird. We saw a lot of Clippers starters. DeAndre Jordan. We saw Tobias Harris play limited minutes because the bench was just playing so well. Do we have to talk Boban?
No, Boban.
Come on.
Boban in this matchup, no.
Yeah. I mean, he played 15 minutes last night. He had 39% usage.
Yeah. Well, that's because like you can just like stand there and you just like lob the ball up to him, and he's like 40 feet tall, so everybody is just like biting at his ankles while he's just dunking on fools.
Any interest in like Montrezl Harrell? Like he got some extra run last night. Like this could be a spot where I could see maybe 20, 25 minutes for him.
I mean, he is a guy that already generally plays like 16, maybe sometimes upwards of 20 minutes, and he's over like a fantasy point per minute of late. He's cheap. Like you could definitely get some exposure, but like it's going to be Tobias, mostly DeAndre, Lou, and those guys.
Yeah, I don't have much interest in like the backcourt like point guards of like Rivers or Teodosic tonight.
I mean, you don't want the Rivers breakout game against Houston. I mean, last time he did play them once this season. He put up 54 fantasy points.
Was that the game Paul sat?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. If Rivers, I mean like a breakout game, that means 29 fantasy points.
Hey, he could get over 30. Like I thought he was going to do it last night because what did he have, like 20, 24 or something like that in the first half? I was like, he might get there.
No.
If you want to sprinkle him in, and if you're stacking the hell out of this game, which you definitely could, like if you want to get some exposure, you could.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's go highest score tonight. No limit because there's plenty of options here.
Kevin Durant.
I like it. Man, I'm gonna go Andre Drummond. Like a monster Andre Drummond game.
I dig it.
So that's it for us. You can enter DaveFantasyCafe.com and check out Brent's GPP article for tonight's slates, cheat sheets, optimizer, everything good to go. And we'll see you guys Friday.
Good luck.